Hey, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Pivot Point podcast. On today's episode, I have Rahil Arora. So I reached out to Rahil a few weeks back because I thought his background and experience would offer a really interesting viewpoint that he could share and pass on to this community that we're building here. Now, when I spoke with Rahil, I feel we stumbled across a few golden nuggets of information that we can explore today. So I guess to give everyone a brief intro, Rahil grew up in India, studying computer science and engineering at VIT, later relocated to the US where he studied security informatics at John Hopkins. His first role out of college was with NCC in the consulting world, later moving to Palo Alto and now with Flexport, a $1.3 billion funded global logistic platform where he's building out the application security program. Now, Rahil, you mentioned to me two pivot points when we first spoke. One was at college and then the other one was at Palo Alto, and we'll get to the Palo Alto one in a bit. But how did this all start for you? How did you get into computer science?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Brad. The way it started for me was back in India when I was going to school. I decided to pursue my bachelor's in computer science. And the reason I did that was because a lot of my friends were following that path. So for me, it wasn't really like, I'd like to think that I'm not really a natural. I wasn't into this field growing up. I was mostly like into sports and when I went to school, I just felt that connection with computer science because of my interest in mathematics. And it was not until my last semester, so we had an elective, and this was, by the way, this was the first year when they introduced this elective called information security. That's when I first came to know about this field of like cybersecurity. So I think what I loved about that was security. They A lot of topics we dive deeper into, like how things work behind the scene. So deep diving into protocols, how does HTTP work, how does TCP work, understanding that, and then finding ways to break those, learning about interesting attacks, right? So that's what made me pursue like a master's in infosec. When I was doing that elective, that's when I decided, okay, I need to learn more about this field, because I think, or I'd like to think I'm one of those people who's like genuinely curious about things. So basically, if I stumble upon an interesting article, I would love to keep following the links from one Wikipedia article to maybe a Stack Overflow to ultimately reading an RFC. And I think that was the pivotal point, the first one that you talked about, me deciding to come to US to do a master's.
That's cool because I think that's a big decision in and of itself, right? Coming from India to the US, obviously you're pretty young as well. Like that's a big step. I guess what was the driving force behind going to the US and studying for computer science to kind of pursue a career, or was it let's see where this takes me? Did you have like a career kind of set in mind?
So for me, it was like at that point when I made up my mind to do a master's in cybersecurity, I started figuring out. So for me, it wasn't the case like, hey, I have to just go to US. This is We are talking almost 10 years back. US was one of the few countries which had these colleges offering a master's in cybersecurity, and even in US, this is like I think 2012 or 2013, very few colleges had a master's. So I remember Johns Hopkins, Georgia Tech, CMU, and a couple of others. They had this program. So that was sort of the reason why I wanted to come to the US, because I didn't want another master's in computer science and then have certain electives, but I wanted to have a track where you dive deeper into all the different topics on security, right?
That's interesting. And then obviously from that, you got your first job with ISEC Partners, now NCC. I guess that was that straight out of college? Like, how did that come about for you?
Yeah, so I did an internship as part of like one of this is 2014, 2013 or 2014. That summer, I ended up doing my internship with a company called Digital. That's when I was first introduced to like the professional side of cybersecurity. So during the internship, I did um, a lot of pen testing, and like security assessments, right? So that is when I realized, hey, you can build a career by doing this ethical hacking or hacking into applications, right? That's what led me into joining ISEC Partners, because this was like a consulting gig. One of the other reasons was, as I was studying, as I was doing my master's in cybersecurity, I was following a lot of research that is being done in this area. I was following a lot of researchers on Twitter, and one of the things I loved about ISEC Partners, which is now NCC Group, is a lot of people I followed, they worked at ISEC Partners. They were doing these amazing research that I was following. So I just told myself it would be really cool to work along with these people that I've just like followed on social media.
That's cool. Um, a question here just sort of just popped up in my head. Did it Was it always kind of pen testing AppSec, or were you exposed to other areas of security? Because obviously there's security is just obviously AppSec pen testing is like this one small pillar, right? And there's so much to it. So like, was it that area you were exposed to first and you jumped at it, or did you kind of look across the board and say, okay, there's these few areas that I like, I'm going to pursue this one? Like, how did that kind of come about for you?
That's really interesting because um, until that point, until I went into that internship, before that, doing 1 year of masters, I didn't even know about that one area, because like the first 1 year of my masters was focused on like the basics of security, right? Mostly on the research side, a little bit on we had again some electives which covered a little bit like different side of security, like what does security means in like critical infrastructure space, right? And then the risk and compliance side as well, legal side of security. But this internship was my first exposure to the world of pen testing.
Interesting. So obviously you jumped at it, and then you said you identified these researchers on Twitter. Obviously saw they're over at NCC, and like this is the place I need to be. So when you're there, obviously you've got the job. You're at NCC. How did you kind of approach these people? Because there must have been some level of kind of mentorship that you gained from these individuals, right?
Yeah, and this is where, and something I would love to speak more about is like challenges that I faced, right? This was like facing the reality. I feel that doing the masters and just following these people on social media, reading about their research, that's a different thing as compared to once you get exposed to this world of like uh, being a professional in cybersecurity, right? Yeah, and I mean, I remember when I was interviewed for this first job, and by the way, this was my first job out of school. I remember someone whom I've been following on Twitter for a very long time. They interviewed me face to face. I went for an on-site interview, and I was super excited. Uh, but like once I started my journey as a consultant, that's when, and again, I would like to focus more on the challenges, because I've not seen a lot of people talk about the challenges that they face, right? So for me, more importantly, this was like self-doubt as a result of like multiple things. So I would like to cover like two things. First is I've always had this thing in my mind where I'm not a natural when it comes to security, right? I've seen a couple of other podcasts from you, and where I think Jason talks about how he started his career early on. And a lot of people, that's what they do. They have that hacker mindset, right? But for me, I've always felt that my story doesn't resonate with a lot of people that I've looked up to, or that I've just spoken to, right? So that was first thing, not being a natural. And second is, I think it's maybe it's more common, which is like English wasn't my first language, right? And I decided to choose consulting as my first job, which requires a lot of interaction, a lot of like presenting your findings to the clients, talking about risks and all of that. So I think those two were the main reasons for me why I had a lot of self-doubts, and to a point even when I thought maybe this is not for me. I maybe made a wrong
Really?
decision.
You kind of felt you got that point, or you got that far that you felt that you kind of were going down a different route, maybe like you went down a software engineering route of some kind.
Precisely. I mean, this was the point where I felt like, okay, this is not for me. I should probably go back to India and just look for like a software engineering job or something.
That's interesting. And then how did you, like, I guess, how did you overcome that? What was, because this, I know this happened again at Palo Alto when we first spoke, obviously. So I guess this is probably where the sort of mindset started kind of coming in. And is that out, like, where did that come from? Is that out of fear or is that out of not being good enough? Like, is that out of like fear of failure? Like, where does that self-doubt come from for you?
Yeah, so I think it was definitely not fear because and there is a very subtle difference between like fear versus self-doubt, right? When you think about it. So self-doubt is you um, it's more an internal thing. You constantly telling like all these negatives to yourself that hey, you're not good enough. And you're not good enough for multiple reasons. Even though you are putting a lot of work in, you're putting your hours into what you're doing. You might be even so. For me personally, it didn't go away at least for the first 4 or 5 years, even being in the industry. And if you do the math, if you think of like 10,000 hour rules, even though I'm not there yet, I did realize that my as I was building my confidence, working in the industry, um, it sort of started to go away. So after a few years in the industry, I realized, okay, the self-doubt and these thoughts weren't to a point where I didn't feel that I don't belong here, right? This was a point where I was I was comfortable. By the way, being comfortable is not a good thing here, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But for me, at I was at a point where I was comfortable doing what I was doing. This is now, by the way, now I've joined Palo Alto Networks. Now I'm working as part of the red team, um, and I was still like these doubts were now different. Um, I Yeah, so different in a way that again I felt that I blocked myself in a comfort zone where I thought I'm like I'm doing well. So this is day to day. I joined Palo Alto Networks as an application security engineer, then moved into red teaming. I'm still doing the same work that I used to do at the first job after school as a consultant, but now in a product security team in an infosec team. Again, I'm not challenging myself enough just yet because I just feel that okay, I've done um, like I have to put a lot of effort to get here, and this is it. This is where I should be, right? And then again, anytime there was an opportunity for me to do something differently or just go out of get out of my comfort zone, those self-doubts they kick back in.
Yeah. It's interesting we're talking about this because I think, as we said, sort of a lot of the people I've spoken to have come from kind of a kind of natural beginning where, you know, a young person kind of having that natural curiosity and kind of they fed into it and sort of went into this kind of they had this hacker mindset, went into it and kind of found a career from the get-go. Like even Ethan Smart in one of the other podcasts, you know, started out at like 17 or 18 in security. But it's interesting from your perspective because it sounds like this all came from just like hard work, grind, and just pure grit, and just learning learning the industry as much as you could by sort of research and sort of trying to grow yourself. But you had obviously those doubts because you know the stuff you were learning, you're kind of doubting along the way of am I right? Is this right for me? Is this the industry for me? So it's interesting that we're covering this because I think again like this stuff's not really spoken about at all, which is interesting. And it's like mental health's become a lot more of a thing the past year and a half, 2 years. But you know, obviously, it's been going on for not extended years, tons of years. So it's interesting we're talking about this now.
And this is so I need to mention this now. Like when you reached out to me, right? it was again the first question in my head, why would you want to have me on the podcast? I don't have an interesting story to tell. So I think these doubts, they don't go away, but over time, as you're putting the work in, as you're building that confidence, you get much better at managing these. So I told myself, it's totally fine. From self-doubt now, it was just a fear of like, what if my story does not resonate with anyone else out there? But I was still willing to just.
Completely. And I guess obviously transitioning jobs, changing jobs, people go through a lot of self doubt then, right? What having gone through sort of a lot of that in your career, what advice would you offer someone? You know, they're given an opportunity, but they're doubting their ability. What advice would you offer them?
Um, I would say so for me, what really worked out, um, so how this all worked out was self-reflection. I mean, and I did, so I wish I would have done that early in my career when I was going through all of these doubts. Was self-reflection helped me understand the reasons why I have self-doubt, right? So for instance, not being a natural. When I did some self-reflection, and part of this was also like association, being around the right people. I realized it's okay to be different. You don't have to be a natural. And then English not being my first language, that was just an excuse. Again, you can do the work, you can gain confidence just by. So I think it all starts with a little bit of self-reflection. I think that would be my advice.
Interesting, because yeah, because I mean, even for me, for this podcast, I'm like, people don't want to listen to this, and then sort of you do one or two, you have to commit to yourself and provide some sort of accountability to yourself. But I think I've spoken about this before. Like one thing for me that helped out was meditation and like quieting the mind, because I think you have your mind just buzzes, doesn't it, with questions and no answers really to all these questions that you've got going on. And obviously, if you try and quiet that, for me, it really helped out. So, but I guess to backtrack, so obviously the position at Palo Alto, I know we spoke about it a little bit, but how did that come about for you? How did that sort of happen?
Yeah, so Palo Alto Networks, I think that was, I can say, another pivotal point in my career, and this is when so I had different roles at Palo Alto Networks. I joined as an application security engineer. I was doing a lot of internal testing, um, just code review and all that stuff, but on the application side. Um, then I think almost almost 1 year into that role, we had some reorg. I was moved to red teaming. This is when I learned the basics of like system infrastructure level security. So this is also around the time when I did OSCP. It's like one of the really good certification in the industry. Um, and from being a red teamer, or being an IC focused on pen testing and red teaming, to leading the application security program, I think I would like to think that's another pivotal point where once I was in sort of like this tech lead role, I started to understand that um, it's like the concept of ownership and accountability. Um, that's the biggest thing I learned out of like transitioning into that role where I was leading the AppSec program. So now one big change that happened was I started to care a lot more about the work, day-to-day work that I'm doing. I started to see bigger picture, the work that I'm putting in. How is it, how the difference it's making, and how is it aligning with the overall our InfoSec team's goals and OKRs.
Interesting, because obviously you said the OSCP there as well. You said before was like a confidence booster of it's a validation, I guess, right? It's a validation of I've passed this, I'm good enough for this, and I have the ability of doing this. And I think that probably did that give you the confidence to kind of obviously after leading a team at Palo Alto as well, but that gave you the confidence to kind of go, I can do this on my own now, and that's when Flexport happened, right?
Sort of, yeah. So I would say passing OSCP was one of those points, and this happened. Um, so again, we are talking like almost 5 years back when I'm still not like extremely confident. One of the things that did help me there was when I was doing my OSCP, I started to have skip levels with like some senior directors and VPs at Palo Alto Networks. And at this point, I used to think maybe like the work that I'm doing, it's not good enough to be. Uh, so let's take OSCP for example, right? The reason I decided to do OSCP was to get some help to learn more about like system security and infrastructure security to help me out with the red team activities. Um, but I did not tell anyone except for my manager, because you have to like it was sponsored by Palo Alto Networks. So when I did my first skip level, I was asked by this leader that how is OSCP going, and I didn't know until then that it's such a big deal. And this was actually the first time when I realized like having a good leader, what it really means. I for the longest time I avoided skip levels and having any kind of I used to think that maybe it's waste of their time. Again, I'm not good enough to just have these conversation with a leader like this one individual. So they and again, I was doing the training. I wasn't really serious about passing the certification because for me it was like a check in the box. What I really wanted to do is focus on the actual technical stuff. But this leader, they told me that you should. They wanted to see me pass the certification because I would be the first person in the company to get the certification, and that sort of boosted my uh, uh, like my confidence that okay, there is someone else who believes in me. um, and I think maybe that was the point where I started to realize okay, it's so important to have these conversations like skip levels. You don't have to seek out like mentorship right away. Just expose yourself to these individuals, these leaders. And by the way, mentorship, this is something I just like started seeking maybe 1 year ago. But before that, I never even used to reach out to people for like mentorship and all of that.
I think it's important, especially having and I think I've said this to you as well, having people that they first sort of they notice talent, but I think they also notice hard work. And obviously, in your case, the second one came before the first one. And I think people want to cultivate that, right? They want to just kind of take you under their wing and show you kind of the ropes, teach you some of the lessons that they've learned, provide some of the guidance and advice that they've offered. So I think, and this is something we've touched on all the podcasts, is having those right sort of leaders around you to kind of guide you and advise you. And even things like this, listening to the right material, reading the right things. I think that certainly gives you a little bit of knowledge and insight into kind of what decision to make and how to make it. So it's interesting you say that. It really is. I guess kind of Flexport, kind of to go back to it then. So now leading the security program there. You're are you one of a team? Like you're leading it up, right? And then you kind of got a few people you're managing. What's the situation there?
Yeah, so I joined as the first security engineer on our security engineering team. So I helped build our pen testing program, bug bounty program. So the basic AppSec, ProdSec stuff, right? And I'm not managing any people yet, uh, but being one of the foundational security engineers really helped me. So sort of what I did at Palo Alto Networks was leading an existing program. At Flexport, I got an opportunity to build things from grounds up. I think this has been a very unique experience. Right now, it's still a very very small team, and still working on it. I've been here for almost 2 years, and the company is growing like crazy. So I don't think this adventure will stop anytime soon. But I think that has been a very rewarding experience, building something from grounds up, with all the experience that everything that you've learned from your previous roles.
It's cool as well because I think listening to this, you can clearly see the kind of professional development, obviously, but also the mental development along the way of starting out at NCC, kind of having those, is this the right job for me? Is this the right career for me? Getting that kind of confidence exposure to a lot of different things at Palo Alto, and then saying, I've got the ability of doing this, I can do it on my own, and now I'm at Flexport. So it's great hearing you talk about it as well. I think there's so much to offer here. I think what advice, obviously there's the imposter syndrome piece, but what advice would you? I know we spoke about the kind of what advice would you offer for the imposter syndrome side, but what advice would you offer someone starting out their careers in security? Like, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, so someone starting out, I would say, like just it's okay to have these self doubts. There is a quote that's like embarrassment is the it's a cost to the entry, right? So I wish I would have done some self reflection, like read a lot of self improvement stuff early on in my career to save me a lot of time that I wasted on like self doubts and stuff. But that's one advice, like do some self-reflection, try to understand like where are these fear and these self-doubts stemming from. And then second, this is something I did do right, which is associating myself with people that I felt like, so back in the day, talking NCC days, the reason I went for that job is because I wanted to be around smart people. I wanted to work with them, right? And back then, I didn't know about this whole concept of like the power of association, why it is so important. I just wanted to work with smart people. So I think that first year, like my first job out of school, really helped me build that technical skill set, which eventually gained me that confidence to move into like these like lead level roles later on in my career.
No, I love that. I think that's a great way to kind of round up the podcast. Obviously offering some advice and kind of, I think there's been lots of advice throughout this entire podcast, really, of how you've kind of got to where you're at in your career. And obviously people can kind of look at this, whether they're even midway through their career, senior experience and levels of self-doubt in a senior level role, or if they're just starting out. So yeah, look, I really appreciate the time, Rahil. I think this has been great. Hopefully, obviously, everyone that listens finds this as well. So, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for giving me this opportunity here.
No worries.